Hello there, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and today we're going to be talking about the new moon solar eclipse in the first decan of Aries. Lots of new beginnings happening, friends. This is the season of new beginnings. Happy spring, by the way. I hope that you're having an excellent beginning to the new solar year, I guess you could say. And we're going to be kind of going on a deep dive into this new moon solar eclipse, one that is conjoining Rahu, the hungry dragon that is trying to consume the elixir of life and trying to figure out how to get all of those needs satisfied and how to create independence and forward movement within our lives. We're going to be chatting it out for a little bit here today. And yeah, if you're joining us, please let me know where you're stopping in from. I'm going to welcome some of our friends here today. Susanna is here. What is up, Susanna? Moi, 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 my friend. Susanna is joining us from Finland, and moi is the traditional greeting of hello in Finnish. So I hope you're doing well out there. I hope your creative endeavors are going well. The paintings are going well. Susanna makes beautiful paintings as well as beautiful bird houses that are painted with all of her lovely imagery. So hope that's going well for you, my friend. Rachel Fletcher is joining us from Roanoke, Virginia. Hello, Rachel. How you doing? I love your little ram and clover there. Hope things are going well over there, down there in Roanoke, and everything is becoming renewed in the light of the Aries sun. Tarja is here. Tarja says hello from, I believe Tarja is also joining us from Finland. So moi to you, Tarja. Hope you're doing well over there as well. Hope that the earlier time that we're doing this today has been useful for my Finnish friends who are probably just finishing up dinner or just starting dinner instead of getting ready for bed. But welcome, friend, and thank you again for joining us and supporting the channel. Kai is here from Kansas. How you doing, Kai? Nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Always appreciate you and your insights. Thanks so much for being a part of it today. All right, friends. So we are going to be talking today about the new moon solar eclipse in the first decan of Aries. So we're going to dive into that. We've got a whole bunch of things to unpack. We're going to be talking about the host. We're going to be talking about Mars and what Mars is doing, hosting this eclipse. We're going to be talking about Mercury retrograde being part of it. We're going to talk about the sextile to Jupiter. We're going to take a look at some slides. We're going to do an I-Ching and an animal to help us through it. But first, I have a few announcements. So friends, if you are enjoying the work that I'm doing here today, you can go over to spencermichaud.com and book a reading on the Book Now button. I have all sorts of things that are on offer, including a mythos reading that helps me to break down your natal chart in a 2-hour reading. We really go into depth, just the same kind of depth we go into on the channel, but I prepare an entire chart for you. I do multiple pages of notes, and we have a nice long conversation about what's going on in your life and how to maybe work with the lifelong patterns that you've been living with for your entire life, and how to maybe maximize or at least learn how to deal with some of those challenges. It depends on what we're going for, but you can also schedule a Kairos reading, which is a 3-month transit reading if you're looking for some timing things. And then I also have something called an oracle reading where you can ask a question and focus on a specific issue. That's a slightly shorter reading, but all of that can be found at spencermichaud.com. So click the Book Now button if you want to work with me. There's also a store button as well where you can find different webinars that I've done in the past. And we have a webinar coming up called Dignity and Devotion, where we're going to be talking about Mars. Me and my lovely partner, Tanya Andrews of Third Coast Mojo, are going to be talking about Mars. We're going to be talking about all the myths associated with Mars, all of the dignities and debilities and how to work with those. We're going to be talking about how to create a devotional practice and create an altar space and to elect Mars elections if you want to draw that energy into your life in a healthy way. So you can join me for that on Saturday, April the 12th, which is coming up in the not too distant future, 1 p.m. Eastern, which is a Saturday. You can also find Tanya over on Etsy at Third Coast Mojo, and she has some really cool stuff right now. Mars, you can see here on the screen, we've got Mars, the Crown of Horns, which is a Mars and Capricorn election, which is Mars in its exaltation. Right now we have Mars in Cancer, which is in its fall. And that can be a little bit difficult to do martial things. Like if you're having some difficulty with focus of moving forward in your life, stuff like the Crown of Horns materia here can really, really help. I've been wearing a lot of this as I'm trying to organize my life and cut through the chatter and the clutter and the distractions to try to get the things done that are most important to us. So check her out on Third Coast Mojo on Etsy. Lots of great stuff over there. Support your locally owned magical business. If you want to get a discount on any readings or classes that I offer in the future, you can subscribe to my newsletter. You can click a link in the description of this video or this podcast, or you can sign up on my website, spencermichaud.com. But once you sign up for the newsletter, you can get 10% discount on anything that I offer. So make sure to take advantage of that. And it helps keep you up to date when we're going to be going live and when we're going to be offering classes and all of those things. And then finally, if you want to support the work I'm doing here today, you can buy a super chat with the little $ in the chat on YouTube today, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com, which is sort of a crowdfunding website that helps me to keep the lights on. This helps buy all the equipment, helps me to buy all the software that I use to run all of this stuff, helps buy books to do the research, and it buys me most of all the gift of time to be able to continue to produce this, basically this internet television show each week. So thank you so much for people who have been able to support in that regard, and it really does go a long way. So those are our announcements. I hope that you all will take advantage of some of those opportunities. We've got some more wonderful folks stopping in. Stephen the Jupiterian is here. What's up, Stephen? Nice to see you. Joining us from sunny San Francisco, I believe. Early today. Yeah, we're going to be trying some things out. We were here at 11 o'clock last week, and I think it went pretty well. I've been trying to avoid Mars in the first house. I don't really enjoy electing things to start when Mars is in the first house during a day chart. So I've been doing it a little bit earlier to try to avoid some of those challenges that go along with it. Sometimes when you get Mars in the first house of an electional chart, a chart that you specifically designed to begin something, you'll run into all sorts of like misfortunes, like I don't know. I've had some things where I've prepared my entire presentation and then all of it just like went away and I had to redo it, or there's something that breaks or something that distracts you from something. So anytime we can, utilize our astrological knowledge to elect a time that might be a little bit more fortuitous, I think it's worth doing so. And I know it's a little bit early for my West Coast United States friends, but thank you so much for being flexible with that. Yes, happy spring or autumn if you're joining me from Australia or New Zealand. We have some cool people that join us from there too. So thanks everyone for stopping in today, or if you're listening on the recording afterwards. Robin Nadira is here. Says, hi everyone. Robin here from Northern California. Excited to be here and hear about the solar eclipse. Well, Robin, I'm glad that you are joining us today too, and that you're waking up early with us here today on the West Coast. So appreciate you, my friend, and we'll try to break it down as much as we can. All right, friends. Well, even though I started the live stream without Mars in the first, we can't completely avoid some of the sirens in the background. So bear with me for 1 minute. I live on a road that is very close to the fire station. So whenever there's anything going on in our little town here of Ypsilanti, Michigan, the fire trucks blaze right by our house. So apologize for that. Okay. So we're talking new moon solar eclipse in Aries. And I'm just going to show you the chart. I'm going to bring the chart up and we will start to kind of break it down. Okay, so here is the chart of the new moon solar eclipse in Aries. And we have the new moon coming together, the sun and the moon coming together, very close to the north node in Pisces, which is interesting. Oftentimes we'll see the north node in the same sign as an eclipse, but here we have it just slightly off enough, but just enough of a connection to create the eclipse conditions. So we have the sun and the moon coming together at 9 degrees of Aries. We have Mercury retrograde co-present. Chiron, the asteroid Chiron, is co-present with the eclipse. And we have a big stack up in Pisces still. We have Saturn still in Pisces. The north node is in Pisces. Venus is retrograding in Pisces in this chart. And then it'll be very close to Neptune. Mercury is going to be backing its booty up into Pisces shortly after this eclipse. So we kind of have the eclipse, and then we've got Mercury moving back into a sign where it is sort of challenged in its exile and fall. We also have Mars squaring the eclipse and as the host. So here is Mars here in Cancer. And then Jupiter is going to be sextile. So I'll break down each part of that for you. But I wanted to make sure that you just got kind of the big overview. So this is going to be on March the 29th at about 6:57 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Make the appropriate adjustments for your time zone. And this is going to be a Rahu North Node eclipse. So this is an eclipse. We often have eclipses. We always have eclipses when they're fairly close to one of the nodes. And there are two ways of thinking about the eclipses. We have a sort of a Western traditional perspective, and we have an Eastern astrological and cultural perspective. Now, Rahu is a fancy name for the severed head of a demon or a dragon in Eastern culture that tried to consume or was successful consuming an elixir of immortality, of eternal life. And there was another deity that was like, hey, Rahu, you're not allowed to do that, and basically cut his head off. And so now the story goes, we have this severed head of a demon or a dragon that has already consumed the elixir of immortality, so they can't die. Now, symbolism we can pull out from that perspective is that the North Node, which you can see here in Pisces, this little hula hoop that we have here, okay, here's the North Node in Pisces, close to the eclipse. It is a place of desire. It is a place of hunger. It is a place where we desire more, but we often do not receive the satisfaction that we would hope to get because there's no body to process it. It's just a mouth. It's just a head and a mouth that's consuming. So in Eastern philosophy, Rahu is one of the more challenging positions. The North Node is something that they're potentially wanting to move away from. Whereas in Western philosophy and astrology, in a modern sense, in the evolutionary astrology model, the North Node was a place of growth and increase on the material plane. And because in Western civilization, Western culture, we admire financial and physical and just growth in general, it has become this point where it's like, well, in evolutionary terms, it's like you want to move towards your North Node and away from your South Node. That's your past, and this is your future. And I would push back on that from a traditional perspective and from an Eastern philosophical perspective. From a Hellenistic perspective, Rahu, or the North Node, is a place of increase. They would think of the nodes as this is the closest thing you can get to sort of a portal experience, right? New Age people talk a lot about portals. This portal's opening, this portal's closing, etc. I would say eclipse portals do have some legitimacy in storytelling, mythological storytelling, around where souls or energy enters the physical plane and where it leaves and returns back to the collective spirit. This would be a place where energy would enter, right, the physical plane. So we have those points of increase in the Hellenistic tradition, where the South Node is a place of decrease, a place of processing. Now, my own personal take on this is that neither of the nodes is better or worse than the other. They are somewhat of a disruptive force because they increase that which can be challenging, but they can also increase good fortune. They can. One of the ways that the Hellenistic astrologers would look at the North Node is if it was conjoining a benefic planet, that could really be a good sign because you are increasing the good fortune that's coming to you. Now, in this case, we have the North Node conjoining Venus at her degree of exaltation. That seems pretty fortunate, right? Because we already have a planet that is at a degree that is very potent for bringing us harmony. And even though it's retrograde, which is not the ideal condition, we are increasing the Venusian qualities at this North Node eclipse. Now, the opposite can be true if a malefic planet is on the North Node, like if Saturn is, which Saturn is somewhat close to this North Node eclipse node as well, right? The North Node, the Rahu. So that could also increase the challenges and the responsibilities that we have. So that's a really complicated way of saying it's kind of a mixed bag. We may be increasing our ability to have compassion, to dissolve the boundaries that separate us with Venus at its degree of exaltation in Pisces. And we also may be increasing our sense of duty and responsibility that Saturn might bring us that might require sacrifice. So really fascinating to me to see the kind of the very textural language, the very layered language that comes through just looking at all of the astrological chart rather than just seeing it just in one piece. So what else does that bring us to? Well, we have the sun in Aries I. Okay. So too long didn't read about the North Node. It's a place of increase. It's a place of desire. Sometimes it's a place where we have difficulty getting our desires satiated. So be very careful about being too hungry for what the eclipse might represent. Okay. Now we move forward to the sun and moon in Aries I. The way that I do astrology, for those of you who are new, or if you're just kind of tuning in for the first time or the first, second or third time, I kind of have a specialty or a unique interest in the decans, which is the 10-degree division of each 30-degree sign. So we take 12 signs of the zodiac and we divide them into sort of 36 slices of the pie, which gives us slightly more specificity. Now, Aries I is a really unique decan because it is one point of beginning within the zodiac. I think there are multiple entry points in the zodiac because it is circular, because it is a cycle, not just a linear type of experience. But this is one where we see the return of the light. We have one where we're seeing the return of the dominance of the daylight hours over the nighttime hours in the northern hemisphere. So it symbolically it has a lot of signification with initiation. Aries itself is a cardinal fire sign, which is a type of sign that is initiating things, that is beginning things. It's the beginning of the fire element. It is a very yang position. Each of the decans has a planet that is associated with it beyond its temple ruler. I say temple because the ancient Hellenistic astrologers believed that each of the signs of the zodiac was a temple for the planetary god or deity to reside in or rule or provide resources for. When we are dealing with the temple of Mars with Aries. So Mars is the one that's going to be providing resources from Cancer right here, from its fall. Now, the decan that we see associated with Aries I is also Martial ruled, Mars ruled. So we have a very, like probably one of the most martial decans in the entire zodiac. The other one that's very martial is Scorpio 1. That's a Mars ruled sign, and Mars' nocturnal temple that is also ruled decanically by Mars. So long story short, that basically means that this is a very young, very aggressive, very initiating. Severing and separating is one of the key words that Robert Schmidt would use for Mars. This decan is all about severing from the collective that we tried to unify into in Pisces 3 and set out on an individual initiation, individual journey. The problem with this decan is that it can lead to collateral damage. This is not the fine-toothed comb or scalpel that we're cutting away things. This is the battle axe. This is the chainsaw. This is just the berserker going into battle and just swinging wildly, rather than like the ninja or the very specifically focused warrior that you might see in Scorpio. Okay. So keeping that in mind, how do we make starts? How do we overcome inertia without destroying the things that are important to us? That's often the most difficult balance that we strike when we're working with Aries energies. How do we get ourselves moving? How do we get our needs met? How do we initiate things without just running roughshod over everyone and everything in our life? And these are going to be questions that we are going to be asking in much more depth, especially in the coming years, because Neptune and Saturn are going to be moving into this area of the zodiac over the course of 2025. So, questions about how do we get our needs met as individuals without trampling on the rights and needs of others unnecessarily. Um, I don't necessarily have all the answers to that right away, but one of the things I like to do in my work is start asking the right questions for reflection. So these are the questions that we're going to be starting to ask potentially. All right. So Mars is our host. Here we have Mars at 22 degrees of Cancer. And that is significant because Mars is going to be sending its resources from the temple of Cancer into the temple of Aries and providing topics, significations, and experiences for all of these planets that are moving through Aries. So there's there's three things actually that make this a little bit of a challenging host. Number one, Mars does not necessarily enjoy or function at its highest capacities in the sign of Cancer. That is the moon's temple, territory, however you want to visualize it. And the moon is known for wanting to bring things together, to collect things, to bring peaceful experiences, especially physically, like bodily experiences. It is more domestic. It's more, it's not direct. Anyone with Cancer placements can tell you that we often will avoid conflict rather than facing it head on. Head-on conflict is not necessarily our forte. Doesn't mean that we're not fierce warriors when provoked, but generally the Cancerian energy is not to start a fight, but to avoid one until there's no other choice. One of the mythological themes and characters that exemplifies this energy perfectly via Liz Green and the Astrology of Fate is our Greek hero Achilles. And Achilles, of course, of the fame Achilles' heel, basically was hidden away by his mother, who was a deity, on the shore of a beach, the perfect place to hide away a crab-inspired hero, right? And she dressed him up in the garments, female garments, hid him away in a tent on a beach, away from war, because there was a prophecy that he was either going to live a long time, an insignificant life for a long time, or he was going to do something great, but his life would be short. And wanting to protect him, she was hiding him away. What drew Achilles out of his seclusion was the loss of his friend. I believe his name was Proclus. And this was his friend, potentially lover. It is ambiguous on some level, but he died. And this was a super impactful experience for Achilles. And we can take that story, and he entered the Trojan War. He turned the tide of the war because he was a crazy good warrior, right? But he did perish. He did have a spot of vulnerability, and he perished in that war. A couple things we can glean from that. First of all, the fact that the Cancerian energy is to want to potentially avoid conflict or hide away from it. Secondly, the thing that will draw Cancerian energy into battle is a close personal loss, grief, right? So that context, I think, is very important to this eclipse. We may be hesitant to get involved in conflicts. We may be watching the descent of American democracy into oligarchy and fascism on the sidelines because it doesn't necessarily affect some of us personally yet. But the things that could start to get you drawn into the fray could be when your personal rights are infringed upon. Someone you care about is affected by the rise of kleptocracy in America. It's one way that this kind of energy could play out, right? It could be completely unrelated to the social experience that we're having right now. But I think that this could be, it could be an interpersonal conflict or challenge. There could be something where you don't want to get involved, but due to it starting to hit home very personally, you might start to get your blood up, your ire aroused potentially. Now, this decan of Cancer has some specific associations with the moon. This is a very lunar decan, probably the most lunar decan. It also has a deity or spirit associated with it called Hecate, right? Or Hecate. And she was a goddess, a triple goddess of the moon that was both responsible for birth and death, for both abundance and scarcity. So there is a feeling in this decan of, I've had enough. I don't know what I want, but I've had enough. And we'll break this down in a second. You'll see this in the card, the imagery of the Four of Cups. So you've got a figure that's sitting underneath a tree, like with his arms folded, refusing more. And I would compare this to feeling like we've had enough in relationship to the body. Like this is, we've had enough food, we've had enough drink, we've had enough snacks. And if we have any more, it'll make us sick. Once we've had the needs of our body satiated, we think about, well, I have enough. I have enough food, I have enough shelter, water, physical needs met. What do I do if I have even more? What do I do with the excess? That's where the philanthropy comes in. This can be a very philanthropic decan. So with Mars at 22 Cancer, a lot of conflicts may be over what do we do when we have some people that are suffering in scarcity and some people that are benefiting from abundance. And this is the exact argument that we are seeing play out in the collective when we have people who are starting to change government rules or eschew government rules so that the haves get richer and the have-nots get poorer and the wealth gap becomes wider. So this to me is a very important eclipse for that narrative that has already begun to unfold in America, in other countries. This is not just an American issue. The rise of authoritarianism is a global phenomenon right now, and one that many of us have had to pay attention to. Many of us are suffering from at this point, and many of us will suffer from in the future if it hasn't quite reached your doorstep yet. So what do we do about it, right? Well, we'll start asking the questions, I guess, is what I will say. So Mars is also square to this eclipse. We might be wanting to make a powerful new start. We may be wanting to sever from the collective, go out on our own path. But Mars is making a challenging aspect. It's making a friction aspect to it. We may be wanting to initiate a number of projects. So if we think about it, not globally, but personally, maybe there is a number of projects that you want to initiate in your life, but you're having to work through limited resources with the way that laws have been changed in America and the trade wars that we're seeing play out between Canada, the United States, China, Europe, because of the corrupt regime that is currently in charge of America, creating enemies where there weren't any in the past. Things are starting to get more expensive. And we may be having to think about our future with the things that we had normally been able to purchase become much more expensive moving forward. And that's where the square energy comes in. I know I've had this is part of my own experience right now. I have a lot of outdoor and house projects I would like to do. I have a lot of gardening things I'd like to do. Part of the reaction to the current political climate that my partner and I are working through is we want to start growing a lot of our own food. So we want to be have more of a self-sufficient lifestyle, which is part of Aries energy. Doesn't mean that we aren't relying on our communities. I think that there's a difference between taking initiative action and being self-sufficient and then being isolated. Those two things I think we're going to have to really work out, as especially as Neptune moves into Aries. Being self-sufficient and being independent does not mean being isolated and never having relationships with and cooperation with other people. But in our own journey, we're seeing the price of goods, the price of wood, the price of metal, the price of everything get more expensive. And what that means is that your resources go less far than they would. And you have to make choices about which projects you want to do or can afford to do, and which ones you have to say, you know what, we just don't have the money for this. We don't have the resources for this. That to me is the conversation between this eclipse in Aries and Mars in the third decan of Cancer. Is there's going to have to be some choices made because of potential limited resources moving forward. We're going to have to say, well, this is our highest priority, and this isn't. Now, the other part of this unfolding, okay, is that Mars is still out of bounds. So in addition to Mars being in its fall and in a place that it is sort of erratic already, think about how a crab moves on the beach, forward, backwards, skittering this way and that. Mars is generally wants to operate like an arrow going directly towards its target. But it is confused in Cancer sometimes. In addition to that, Mars has a condition called out of bounds, which is basically, Reader's Digest version, the planet acting outside of the normally socially acceptable manner. And we've seen this from December 30th, and it will happen all the way until April the 7th. And we've seen indiscriminate cutting in various social programs, government programs. We've seen conflicts that have arisen that are not normal, conflicts that are being manufactured out of thin air between Canada, one of our greatest allies, and the United States, one of our best friends for decades. And now there's a conflict being manufactured with Mars out of bounds. So this eclipse will still have that condition. The good news, in my opinion, is that Mars is going to be back in bounds shortly after this. Now, we're not kind of out of the woods yet, because Mars is still going to make an opposition to Pluto. And it's also going to square the Sun shortly after it moves out of its fall and into Leo. So there's going to be this big T-square. That kind of sucks, because I was looking forward to it going back in bounds and being out of Cancer. It's kind of like out of the frying pan into the fire type of experience. But I do have some hope. I'm going to hold on to the shred of hope that Mars not being out of bounds and not being in its fall might lead to better outcomes. So something to consider. Rachel Fletcher says, I recently rewatched the Aries Decan webinar and have been thinking a lot about the daimon Adoneus in this Mars-ruled decan, especially with the final Mars-Pluto opposition next month. That's a great point, Rachel. So yes, one of the spirits in this decan is Adoneus, which is an alternate name for Hades, or Pluto, or the god of the underworld. And one of the features of Adoneus, or Pluto, or Hades, is that in mythology, he tends to erupt from underneath the ground to abduct people. So one thing that we've seen in the collective, unfortunately, is random abductions of people to be carried away to their own personal Hades, their own personal hell. I'm thinking specifically of the Canadian actress who, by virtue of being white and famous and rich, has put a big spotlight on the nefarious actions of ICE in the United States. Now, this garbage was happening to people of color well beforehand, and people were rightfully upset even about that. But now, because it's happening to someone with resources and power and privilege, uh, people are starting to get even more alarmed, which is normally how these things happen, unfortunately. So all of you have probably heard that, the poem, I guess, the saying about first they came for this group of people, then they came for this group of people, and then there were no one else to come for. And this is in reference to people in Nazi Germany in the 1930s. And this is sort of the way that this is playing out a little bit in our own timeline. Is they are coming for people that are most vulnerable, specifically people of color, immigrants, trans people, etc. And slowly but surely, because these forces are run by corporations, by people who value profit over humanity, they're not going to make those demarcations anymore. They're not going to necessarily care whether you're an immigrant, whether you're gay or trans, whether you're a man or a woman. You're just a number. And one of the interesting things I've been reading about, interesting, I mean horrifying, is that a lot of these immigration facilities are for-profit industrial prison systems. The more people that they put in there, the more money that they get. So due process isn't something they're thinking about, profit is. So be careful about this type of energy, and with the Adonius energy. I have often seen Pluto transits. Pluto, being a version of Adonius, where we saw abductions in the news. I'm thinking specifically of the first Trump administration, where people in Portland who were protesting, exerting their constitutional right to protest in the United States, were being abducted in white vans and taken to facilities, mysterious facilities. And that was during a Mars-Pluto opposition in Cancer and Capricorn. So that condition is coming back again. Mars-Pluto opposition is coming back from Leo and Aquarius in the coming weeks. I guess it's just a long-winded way of saying that first of all, be careful out there. Protect your vulnerable people. Don't assume that you're safe because you have privilege. Don't assume that because these challenges haven't met you yet that they will not. Yeah, it's these are interesting times. So that's Mars, square, out of bounds, in its fall, in Cancer. Let's move forward. This new moon, the good news, that's the challenging news. That's the challenging news. And friends, I have done my darndest to make this community a little bit of a, hopefully, an oasis and a peaceful centering experience from the personal and collective challenges of the world. It is important to me to create, as a Cancer 2 decan, what I would hope is a safe space for people to express themselves, to have a peaceful discourse with one another. That being said, when people like me, the Cancer, who is in the tent, like Achilles, who is away from conflict, like doing anything to not get involved in war and conflict, when I'm pulled out of my tent and into the fray and are sounding the alarm with this stuff, it's probably things are starting to get pretty concerning. And we're at that point. So I can only contextualize that through the language of astrology here. And I will do my best to give you the tools to make your own judgments with that. But as I've said in past broadcasts, there is not a single person or astrologer on the planet that is 100% objective. Zero. Because they are human, they are going to be filtering the interpretation of these symbols through their own lens and viewpoint. And I'm guilty of that too. So take the information how you will, but the symbols definitely do show us some of the advantages and disadvantages of each of these placements and some of the challenges that we may be dealing with collectively. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to make those connections with the experiences that I'm having personally and that I'm seeing play out with observation of different people in my life and in the collective. So the new moon sextile Jupiter. I do think that there is a little bit of a benefic help in this eclipse. You know, Venus is conjoined the North Node, but is not witnessing the sun and the moon. It's in aversion to it. But Jupiter does witness, and the moon is applying to Jupiter. So I do think Jupiter can help, although I will say that the help that Jupiter is giving is limited because it's in its exile and because it is scattered. I don't think right now we have a good plan, whether personally or collectively, because we are dealing with the challenges of multiple distractions, which is a strategy for authoritarianism. I would also say that we've probably just, by virtue of Jupiter communicating through Gemini, have had an expanded desire to pursue many different things at once. And sometimes that can diffuse our focus. So Jupiter will be helping, but it's going to be helping by providing a lot more information. And our jobs is to weed through that information and figure out what is actionable. So one thing to consider with this. Julene is joining us. What's up, Julene? Nice to see you joining us from Arizona. Hope you're doing well, my friend. We're just breaking down the eclipse here. We were talking about some of the scary stuff with Mars, but we're moving forward with some Jupiter significations here. So Jupiter could be helping. I think that the way that I would consider remediating Gemini is picking one thing, doing it well, putting some other things on the back burner. Gemini is about choices. The final decan in Gemini shows us a choice that has to be made. One sacrifice of one option, one twin, so the other can live. So gather as much information as you can, but then try to be as decisive as you can. This is one of my projects that I've been working on lately. I have had some challenges being decisive in the past because of the fact that I am someone who loves to explore things in great detail. I have Jupiter in Virgo, the other Mercury ruled sign. So I'm constantly weighing the pros and cons and details of every single choice and decision, big or small, that I make. And one of the things that my personal projects has been is to get more comfortable with just making a choice, living with it, learning from it if it ends up being the incorrect choice in the moment, and then just going on with my life. An example of this the other day, I spent about 4 hours looking for a blender. And I know it sounds stupid, but I make a protein shake every morning and our blender broke. And instead of just buying the first thing I saw, I have limited resources. So I'm like, I have to figure out if this will work. And I really want a glass jar and I want to make sure it's powerful enough and blah, 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 blah. I want to read the reviews. And eventually I looked at it and I was like, I'm going to choose one that's not super expensive, that's as well reviewed as it can be, and then I'm going to live with it. And I pushed the go button. And then the Mercury retrograde in me said, oh, I found one that's slightly better. So I canceled it and bought something else. And then I was like, all right, I'm done. And it came in the mail yesterday and it's fine. It wasn't a $500 blender. It was like a $60 blender. It works perfectly. It's fine. It's an example of just being decisive and then letting it go. And it's a process. And you have to practice that type of decisiveness just like you would practice any other skill. Like, yes, in the moment I had like I questioned my decision, but now it's here and it's fine. I think that when we are dealing with Jupiter and Gemini and things of that nature, or if we have really extreme Libra placements sometimes, I would say both Mercury and Libra placements have sometimes difficult with decisions because they both can see all the options, and they also are trying to think about how their decisions affect not only themselves but others. This is one thing that is good about Aries season. Aries season says just let's just do it. Let's just do it and we'll figure the rest out later. And there is some beauty within that. And I felt that energy immediately as a Leo ascendant when the ruler of my first house went into Aries. I was like, I had a really productive day yesterday because I wasn't hemming and hawing about decisions. I was just like, nope, let's do this. Let's do this. I don't have time to think about this. I'm just going to do it. And you'd be amazed at the relief that that feeling can give you. Now, you do have to be careful sometimes, but a little bit of that can go a long way. So decisiveness, how do we practice being more decisive and living with the decisions and seeing it as part of a longer informative journey rather than just as this decision is life or death. And if I make a mistake that I'm a terrible person or everything's going to go wrong, it's okay sometimes to just do something. And if it doesn't work out, then you've learned something from it. Carly Heath is here. What's up, Carly? Nice to see you, friend. Another longtime friend and supporter stopping in. Hope that you're doing well, my friend, and all of your beautiful animals over there on the West Coast. Julene says, as a natal Jupiter in Gemini 1, I concur with the scattered. What do I prioritize? What I will say is, as the planets have moved into Aries, including my chart ruler, I've experienced very recently with the sextiles, Aries is waving its hand saying, do this first. The viable and immediate options are super loud right now. I hope it doesn't get messy again as they retrograde back into Pisces. Maybe some things will just take care of themselves off the board. Great observations. Yeah, and I felt the same way. Yesterday at the equinox, I just felt like I was waking up from a dream, and I was like, okay, I'm not confused by this anymore. I know what I've got to do, and I'm just going to do it. And I'll tell you what, we spend so much mental energy weighing possibilities as Gemini, Virgo, Libra types, or other types. I mean, it's not specific to those placements, but as people who sometimes can struggle with seeing things from multiple perspectives. And it just feels such a relief to just be like, I did this. I didn't have to waste more mental energy than it required. Now, there's some decisions that are much more permanent that you should consider. There is a thing that they talk about in construction, measure twice, cut once. And there's some advantages to that. There are bigger decisions that, like, for example, I'm putting some new bushes and trees in my property. And that has a much longer term ramification. You don't want to be moving those things around a lot. You want to plan that out a little bit better. So taking your time with those types of decisions is probably more important than just like what type of blender you want to buy. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, and other decisions like if you want to marry somebody, maybe taking your time with that is probably a decision that has much more long-term ramifications. This is why it's sort of not a great idea to just go off and do a shotgun wedding, after like a night of partying with somebody in Las Vegas, because it might not turn out the way that you thought. You might want to live with that person for a little while. You might want to get to know who they really are. So different decisions require different solutions. Carly says, I'm weighing employment opportunities right now, and the ramifications of my decision will be long-term. See, Carly knows. This is the type of thing that has a much larger impact, and it is worth weighing the different options. At some point, though, Carly, I know as a Libra rising, you probably just have to make a choice, and it'll turn out how it turns out. And if the job is great, awesome. And if the job isn't what you wanted, that'll give you valuable information towards what is actually right for you. Same thing with our relationships too. When we fear getting into a relationship because we don't want to get hurt, right? Sometimes the wrong person will show us what we do want in a relationship. Sometimes the wrong job will show us what we don't want in a job. But yeah, Carly says, I'm definitely writing the pros and cons list. Yeah, And what I would suggest with that, friends, in Aries season, just set a deadline with it. Say, I'm going to think about this for 2 days, and I'm going to make a choice at the end of the 2 days. I would, Julene was bringing up a good point about all these things retrograding back into Pisces, which can really start to confuse the details. I don't think there's anywhere that any of us necessarily have to be right in this moment. Your mileage may vary with some of those choices. I'm feeling time pressure with my garden because if I don't get certain things in the ground, they won't do as well this year. If I don't start seeds in the next few weeks, I won't be able to have a harvest by a certain period of time if I'm going to grow food or things like that. But so there are definitely things that have time pressure. But some things in our life, we feel time pressure, but aren't necessarily so. So each individual case, we'll have to figure that out for ourselves. Carly says, is there a day in the coming 2 weeks where decision making will be more clear? You know, yes. And I think that one day, just as I'm recording this, we're going to have a Mercury cazimi on Monday, the 24th. And I think that might be a moment of clarity and awareness for making good decisions, even during the retrograde point. I will also say Tuesday through Thursday, there's a void of course moon next week where the decision making might not work out so well. And then you might have another opportunity on Friday before the eclipse and before all those planets move into Pisces. If you don't make a decision by then, it might be a little bit stickier with all of those things retrograding into Pisces. But that's a good question. I have some projects where we've scheduled them on Monday to make the decisive action because of that knowledge with Mercury cazimi. Steven's talking about the Venus star point on March 22nd. That could be potentially too. I mean, I think that Mercury is going to be moving into the cazimi condition probably by late Sunday. So Sunday, Monday. Carly says the Neptune retrogrades are definitely making my decision making uncertain. Yeah, it's, again, just try not to beat yourself up with it, Yeah, you got this. Chad is here. What's up, Chad? Chad says, all this traffic around the world point is very exciting to me in spite of the authoritarian currents. Along with the outer planet ingresses makes me wonder if we're heading for an awakening. Not sure if it'll manifest as a dramatic series of events like aliens or like a lot of astrology are saying. I think it'll end up being more of a subtle shift. Yeah, I think that yeah. First of all, just aliens, I don't know. Like, I think that is, I will never rule out a possibility like that. That would be fascinating. It will be terrifying and fascinating, all wrapped up in one package. But, beyond something like that just completely transforms our understanding of our place within the universe, I do think that I have come to start to attempt to see things from a longer term perspective. And I mean that by not judging something as quote unquote good or bad right in the moment. I can judge things as painful or not painful in the moment. I think that is real. But as far as like a moral judgment on it, sometimes the situations get much worse before they get much better. And that is something that you see in Taoist philosophical stories, is one event that people will judge as bad often leads to abundance in the future. One event that looks like abundance could lead to lack in the future. It's a constant flowing between these things. So I've been kind of just observing everything that's happening. I'm still concerned. I'm still horrified by some of the painful things. But I'm holding out space. I'm holding space for those events to lead to the opposite reaction that could maybe move us in a different direction. So I think that's what you're talking about on some level, Chad. But yeah, we'll have to see it unfold. And one planet that is somewhat subtle, I think, is Neptune. Aries is not a subtle sign, though. I think that's the challenge that we have here. Subtlety is not what Aries is known for. Aries does things big and loudly, and yeah, I think that there's potential for the noise to get much louder as we get to this eclipse point. Julene says Mars in Virgo. Woo woo. I'm thankful for it though. Sifting through the difference between destructive hesitation and patience can be a bit challenging at times, but it serves me in the end mostly. Yeah, Julene, we share Mars in Virgo, so I think that this is definitely, I am a fan of trying to do something quote unquote correctly the first time, and oftentimes that takes longer and it takes more research, but it does save you a headache in the future. But sometimes there's just time constraints that don't allow for that. Like I know that this is a silly, mundane example, but the blender, that was a tool that I needed immediately. Like that was making my life very difficult not having that, because it was something that I made my breakfast with every single day. It was something I used every day. And I didn't have time to be precious about it. I just needed something that would function. And even if it wasn't perfect, and it's not, the one that I bought is good, but there's some parts of it that are slightly cheaper made than the previous one that I had. But for the money, I think it was a good choice. And we'll see how it plays out. But you'll all be on Spencer's blender watch for a few months. I don't know, it sounds ridiculous. But sometimes these little things in our life make a big difference. I mean, you can hear the Mars and Virgo coming out in both Julian and I's, what we're getting upset about. Like, but I think that sometimes things that are important to us and that make a big difference in our life, they do hold weight and meaning for us. I think the universe does not always function in the type of scale that we want to apply to it. Oftentimes, little things in our life, little annoyances, feel like the end of the world or feel like a really big problem, even if they're not from other people's perspective. So it's all relative, and we're all trying to figure out how to do this thing called life. Chad says, yes, Neptune in Aries seems to imply the heroic martyr archetype. Yeah, Chad, we've talked about that a little bit too. We've talked about Neptune and moving into Aries as glamorizing, independence, glamorizing isolationism, glamorizing the warrior. One thing I will direct you towards, Chad, if you aren't familiar with one of my favorite kind of archetypal astrologers is Liz Green. Her book on Neptune is excellent. And one of the things that has come out of that research is oftentimes Neptune will glorify and glamorize the sign qualities that it moves into in the beginning of its transit. And we will all fall into this kind of collective fog / delusion around elevating those qualities to a transcendent level. So we would elevate the warrior, the hero, the fighter, the independent, my way or the highway autocrat to a deified level. And by the end of the Neptune transit, we all see that it was just a dream and an illusion. And we wake up from that collective, dream, I guess you could say. And I think that the way that I see it playing out is there will be an elevation of individual, powerful fighter type people, but eventually we will wake up from that and we will take them down from their pedestal. So if you know that going in, you don't have to get intoxicated by it in the first place. That's what astrology can give us, the ability to see right through the crap and say, well, we don't have to buy into that, in the beginning of this. We don't have to buy into the myth of radical independence or isolationism or of might makes right. We don't have to buy that at all. And then we're not going to wake up from a delusion because we never fell prey to it in the first place. Yeah, willingness to tell it like it is, Chad says. Yeah, right. Well, it's going to hurt a lot of people doing that. There's a lot of collateral damage that comes from Aries, especially in the first decade. So we have to be careful with that. All right. So good discussions. I love the communal creation that we're doing here on the channel. Let's see. Chad says, oh, Carly said, Chad says, I've heard that argument before about the seduction of early Neptune. Thank you for bringing that into the combo. Oh, great. Appreciate that. Yeah, that has really changed my perspective on that planet in particular, and helps me not to get sucked into the challenges of it. Hopefully. Carly says there might be an elevation of folk heroes, sort of a Luigi Mangione, sort of like potentially, yeah. And as much as I as much as I hate oligarchs and disagree with exploitive CEO healthcare people, I have questions about the Luigi Mangionis. I think that there's a way to do things that may not involve his choices, but he definitely became elevated to almost to the point of sainthood in some eyes. And I understand. I understand why. And even sometimes will feel like, wow, yeah, that is a really powerful statement to make collectively from wherever. But as someone who, I don't know, someone who is a peaceful, hopeful, peaceful person, I hope that, I hope murder isn't the answer, I guess I will say. And who knows? Not every revolution is peaceful. Sometimes there are violent and bloody revolutions, but as a peace-loving person, I hope that there are ways forward that are equally as strong, but potentially less violent. Yeah, Julene says, Lord, please include some noble warriors. Yes, exactly. And Steven says, murder is never justifiable. Yeah, I don't know if if I can completely unpack everything that Luigi represented and give a good argument one way or the other for righteousness or not with that in this broadcast. I'd have to do a lot more reflecting on that. But I tend to agree with Stephen that I don't think murder is justifiable. But I also completely understand the impetus behind it, if that makes sense. I understand that is a symbol of people's suffering, like people being exploited by a system that they feel powerless against, and that act made more people feel like something was being done. And I don't know if it was the right answer, but I understand the impetus behind it, if that makes sense. Yeah, Julene says, murder is never the answer, but I will say from inside of the system, the issues are all true regarding healthcare and then some. I agree, Julene. And that's why I said, as a pacifist, generally, I'm not going to advocate for what he did. But I understand how corrupt the system is, and I hope that something can be done, whether it's hopefully through peaceful and legal ways. All right. So Mercury retrograde and Chiron co-present with the sun. Again, Mercury is going to be retrograding back into Pisces and conjoining Neptune very shortly after this eclipse. Literally, I think the day of, like a few hours after the eclipse. So we will have this burst of energy, and then Mercury is going to, Mercury is not only, I mean, look at this. So here's like a few days afterwards. Now Mercury is going to be, actually, I'll wait to unfold that for a second. But Mercury, if we take this forward by a few hours here, okay, you can see Mercury is going to retrograde back into Pisces later in the day. It's going to, well, here it's much later in the day. There it is. Okay. And it's going to conjoin Neptune and Venus. So conjoining Neptune and retrograding back into Pisces, not the best place for clarity. So if you want to communicate clearly, try to get your communications done before this eclipse is what I will say. You've got a week, all right? But sometimes we don't always have the luxury to do that. So try not to be afraid of making decisions when these planets are in their exile, detriment, etc. What I will suggest, though, is if you do have important decisions that need to be made while Mercury is in Pisces, retrograde, conjoining Neptune, just really double check everything. Double check all of the details. Double check whether you were understood by the other party. This is an aspect that is ripe for misunderstandings. So you may think that you've communicated clearly. You may think that you wrote the right number on the check or something, but it's very, very easy for that communication to go south. So always ask questions, always get clarifications, double, triple check communications, and then make sure that the message was clearly received if you're going to have those types of communications during this type of aspect, if that makes sense. All right. And then the 30th here, we have Neptune moving into Aries. So a few hours later, you got Neptune moving into Aries I. We've been kind of talking about that at length. There it is, Neptune moving into Aries. I won't belabor Neptune and Aries. We've kind of talked about that. Maybe I'll do another broadcast on Neptune and Aries specifically. But again, I think it's the glorification, glamorization of independence, of cutting ourselves off from support sometimes too, thinking that we are able to move under our own power when we actually are interconnected in many, many ways. And the beginning of the cycle is, I think, much more delusional than the end. So try not to get sucked into the new collective shiny philosophy right away. There's going to be a lot of probably seductive is a good word, seductive messaging around taking action and asking questions later. And I would avoid that if you can. Just saying, this is from someone who's fairly risk averse. So take that for what you will. But I have often found that making decisions with clarity is, despite all of the things that I talked about earlier, do a little bit of homework first, sleep on it at least, then sleep on it again, and then maybe you can make a decision. Depending on how long-term its ramifications are. Like, here's an example. If you wake up one morning and Neptune moves into Aries and you're just like, I want to leave my marriage, like this other person looks hot that lives down the street. There's ramifications for that, right? So you might want to consider that more so than, wow, I would like to take a martial arts class. You could sign up for that and that could have less ramifications long term. Do you see what I'm saying? You can be impulsive about that. You don't have to think that to death. I guess you might want to think about if it's cost effective or if your body can handle that. But there are different levels of importance when it comes to those types of things. Okay, so I'm going to go back and I'm just going to talk a little bit more about Aries I. Okay. Yes. Rachel says, yes, a Neptune and Aries broadcast. I will have to look at the schedule and see how that might fit in. For those of you who aren't, well, I haven't even really announced it, but I'm taking a break next week. I'm taking a vacation. When does Neptune move into Aries? Yeah, next week would have been when I would have done that, but I'm on vacation, so I am not going to do a Neptune and Aries broadcast next week, but the 11th I might do something like that. Maybe I'll talk about the newly ingressed Neptune and Aries on April the 11th. How does that sound? Sound good? All right, let's do it. If you can wait a little bit, like if you don't need me to talk about it ad nauseum before it actually happens, then I will be able to, put all the pieces together for you. Yeah, vacation is priority, Rachel says. Thank you. I appreciate it. Tracy, great advice. Thank you, Tracy. Appreciate you, friend. Yes, Rachel, Tanya and I have pre-planned quarterly breaks into our schedules, like a week off where we're just not scheduling anything. No clients, no live streams, no classes, Although I do have a class on Monday, but that's, you know, that's the last thing I have for the week. And I think it's good. It's good to recharge, and it's good to be able to just get caught up on stuff and to take a little brain break. And especially when you're self-employed like myself, like there's always more things to do. There's always more, you know, marketing. There's always more, you know, course construction, research, details, emails, all of it. And I think that we have noticed when we take a little break and recharge, it really powers us up for the next few months. And doing that regularly, I think, is really self-care, good self-care. And we are fortunate to be able to do that. Like Tanya never takes any days off. So she's got like a couple months of vacation time banked, which is very fortunate for her. But we're finally just making her take it. She's a Capricorn rising. So like I think that taking a vacation is hard for her, but you know, we're getting it done. Tracy says, sorry I'm late. I think I got the wrong time. No worries, Tracy. You know, we're moving the times around lately. Thank you everyone for being flexible at the time. Like I said, I've been trying to adjust the start time to avoid Mars being in the first house. And I think it's working out okay so far. I reserve the right to change the time again. I would actually prefer things to be 1 or 2 in the afternoon Eastern time. When once Mars moves off of the ascendant, I probably will move it back to that, but we'll see. Maybe this will work out and we'll keep it. We'll see. Julene says the 29th, it's going to be there a while. You have time. Awesome that you're getting a break. I appreciate that, Julene. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about Sun and Moon and Aries I. So here you see the tarot card associated with the Sun and Moon in Aries I, or with Aries I in particular, and that's the Two of Wands. And one of the things that we've been talking about with Aries I is this desire for independence. Just something to see in the chat. Kai says, Neptune will be in Aries for 14 years. We can wait a week. Good. that's you're right. We can wait a week. Yes. So thank you, Kai. So Aries I, it's called the Lord of Dominion. Austin Coppock calls it the axe. You know, we talked about like the axe, the chainsaw, collateral damage, the berserker just swinging wildly. We see the daimon Adonis, right, that Rachel was referring to earlier. We have a vision here of potentially, there are lots of tarot scholars that compare this figure on this card, the Two of Wands, to Alexander the Great, who was very hell-bent on conquering new territory and expanding his empire. Does that sound familiar? We have people now that are hell-bent on conquering new territory and expanding their empires. And that may be the delusion. That may be part of the delusion of Neptune and Aries is that manifest destiny delusion, where we're trying to expand empires and we see authoritarian rulers trying to annex territories. And that's probably a mistake, because all of these nations are sovereign nations that deserve their own governance and their own decision making and deserve not to be invaded by narcissists. So what are we looking at? Double Mars. Mars ruled, Mars face, Mars Chaldean descending order, Mars triplicity ruler. It's Mars. So what is its function? Severing the umbilical cord, right? This is where it does have purpose. It isn't all bad. Like Aries is one of the signs that gets kind of a bad rap in astrology, along sometimes with Gemini, because they're for different reasons. Aries is because sometimes Aries can run roughshod over our feelings, and then we're like, oh wow, that was painful. And Gemini maybe because of the Gemini's tendency sometimes to switch direction very quickly, right? And which can be observed as fickleness. But in this case, there are times where we do have to just be decisive, strike out on our own. Please don't mistake what I say about Neptune and Aries in general, about the delusions of independence as not saying that there aren't times where we need to take care of ourselves. There definitely are. Like this is the balance: is we can be sovereign, independent individuals while still being part of a community and part of a larger fabric where we're working towards harmony with others. Like, I mean, that these two things aren't mutually exclusive. I mean, there are times when it is toxic to be overly dependent on something or a system. So, I'm not like saying that this doesn't have a purpose. Severing the umbilical cord. Chokmah in Atziluth is the sephira associated with the Kabbalistic tree of life for this particular decan, card. So it's a flash of insight, a flash of inspirational insight. Splitting of the one, cellular mitosis, right? Where we are, splitting and starting to create growth through that cellular splitting. Raw force, undiluted yang, the sperm breaking through the wall of the ovum, the bursting of the seed husk. All of these are imagery for this decan. So questions to reflect on with this eclipse, when planets like Neptune, Saturn, all of it move through here. You can think about this through the language of that particular planet. How can you individuate? What is you and what is not you? Okay. I think that's one of the first questions that Aries I asks is, what am I not? I think that this is important to highlight for Neptune moving into Aries I also, is the first 10 degrees of Aries is more about rejecting the standard, rejecting the collective. The second decan is more about saying, this is who I am. I've told you who I'm not. Think about the teenager, right? That says, I'm not my parents. I don't want to, you want me to be this, but I'm not this, and I'm going to create conflict. And finally, through a process of learning through experience, they start to say, well, this is who I am. And I don't have to make you wrong, dad, mom. I know who I am, and you can be who you are if they're healthy, if their ego is healthy, right? Oftentimes we get stuck in the stage of development where we say our parents are terrible and we reject everything about them, and we get stuck in that. We blame them and things of that nature. But this is more of the stage of saying, I'm not this. I'm going to go strike out on my own. So how do we do that in a way that doesn't destroy everything around us? That's a good reflection. So how can you break new ground? And where is brute force necessary? There will be some situations where you do have to use yang force, but where is it excessive? This is a big question in the collective with the new movement towards cutting government programs and structures and things that have been there for a long time. This has just been, in my opinion, it's excessive. So where in your own lives do we need to break new ground and make a new start? But where are we tempted to just throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is what we're kind of observing in the collective? Is, yes, there might have been some bloat in certain areas, inefficiencies, but while getting rid of all of those things, like really important things are also getting cut out, and I can cite all sorts of examples, but we don't have time to go down that path here today. What new territory do you want to conquer? We all have new things in our life that we need to pursue to keep our lives fresh. Sometimes our lives can get a little bit stale with routine. I know that this has been something I've been working on because I am absolutely 100% a creature of habit and routine. I've needed to become that, to become a functional person, because in my early life, I didn't necessarily have that. It was kind of a lot of chaos, and that was really difficult for me growing up. And I have found that my ability to know exactly what I'm going to eat in the morning, at what time, exactly what I'm going to do from 7 o'clock till 10 o'clock helps me a great deal. And if I'm not able to do those things, I don't have as good of a day. But every routine, every thing that we make an assumption in our life, every habit, every once in a while, it's good to question those things and say, is this really working as well as it should? And sometimes you need the energy like of Aries to really say, I'm tired of doing things like this. I'm tired of being a part of this thing, whatever it is. And that's the energy here of Aries I is I'm sick of this. I don't know exactly what I want yet, but I don't want this. And you can say, I don't want this without destroying it. You can leave a situation without, you can leave a relationship without murdering your ex, if we're talking about whether murder is appropriate or not, right? You may have a fantasy that you want to do that, but it's not going to work out so well for you if you're like, I can't go off on my own unless I literally end this person's life. Do you see what I'm saying? Like that's sort of the metaphor that we're working with here. No, if you do something like conscious uncoupling, you're able to go your own way, they're able to go theirs, and everyone survives intact. So this is a way to, I think, to do Aries I well, is think about it like conscious, not just conscious uncoupling, but conscious rejection of something that doesn't work for you anymore, while not necessarily having to make that thing categorically wrong. Sometimes there are things that aren't right for you anymore that aren't that at one point were right for you. See what I mean? Sometimes there's a relationship or like a home or a job or a blender. I don't know. That was at one point it was awesome. And then sometimes it breaks down. Sometimes the blade stops spinning at the bottom of the jar. And it's not that the blender itself was bad. It's just that it had served its purpose during that time. And it was time for a different one, right? You know, you can write a bad review to Oster. You know, you can. I'm taking this metaphor. I'm milking it for as much as I can get out of it. I think it's funny, by the way. You could write a review, a negative review, and say, this company is terrible and this thing broke after 10 years worth of use, of joyful use that I got out of it. And fuck this thing. And oh, this new Black & Decker blender this is what I should have had the whole time. But what are we doing here? You know that you got 10 years out of good times out of that blender. Why do you need to make it wrong? That's a silly example of like, you could apply that to your marriage. You could apply that to living where you live, where you're not happy anymore. You at one point it potentially was the right thing for you. And to not create the to not have to completely destroy something to move on from it takes maturity. The immature person has to completely destroy something to create change. The mature person can create change while allowing whatever it was to potentially stay intact, depending on the circumstance. There's some things that do need to be destroyed, but there are ways to do it that don't completely create suffering, if that makes sense. So what new beginning is worth fighting for, right? What new territory do you want to emerge into or out of? Yeah, Julene says, Oster is toast. Yeah, that's right. Without getting me too down that rabbit hole, I had this awesome blender that was called Oster Versa. That's like kind of like a Vitamix, if you're familiar with that brand, but it's like a mid-range Vitamix. Vitamix are expensive. They're like $400 or $500. This was a couple $100 less than that, but I replaced it with like a $60 Black & Decker, mostly because I wanted a glass cup to blend in instead of plastic. but I read the reviews. It was good. I made my first shake this morning. Worked out fine. I saved myself a couple $100, and life goes on. And this is how I think we can unconsciously uncouple from things that we once loved, but we don't have to make it such this big deal all the time. And I know that relationships aren't blenders, but sometimes love can feel like we're in a blender, right? All right. That's a song, isn't it? Sometimes love feels like like I was thinking about the sometimes love don't feel like it should because it hurts so good, but how can we turn that into a blender song? Sometimes love blends you up like it should, baby. It hurts so good. All right. So that's our Aries one. We've talked more about the host Mars. Before we do that, let's break down, let's give you some additional insight into Cancer 3. Okay. Before I go to Cancer 3, do me a huge favor. I'm going to take a little stretch here. I didn't have time to to work out my like potty break music, but I ate my lunch and did all those things beforehand this time. So do me a huge favor, friends. While I take a stretch, please like the video. It really, really does help. It's the simplest thing you can do. Subscribe to the channel. If you are not a subscriber, but you participate in the chats, what are you doing here, friends? Like there is an option where we can turn these chats into subscriber only, which I have considered in the past, but I like to keep access open, but it does do me a huge solid to actually subscribe to the channel. So if you haven't yet, please do so. It helps you to know when things are going on. It helps me to understand how I'm doing with my audience and the growth of my business, etc. And yeah, it's very simple. All right, so now we've stretched. Now we're gonna come to the home stretch here. Oh, Julene, thank you so much for the super sticker, friend. Appreciate you. You're always so generous on the channel, so thank you so much for that. Appreciate that. Yeah, if you want to make a donation to what I'm doing like Jolene did here today, you can hit the little $ in the chat. It's called a super chat or a super sticker. And it really is helpful. You know, any little bit helps. You know, these are things that I use to purchase the subscription to the broadcast program that I use. All of the, you know, being able to put your comments up on and the slides up, all of that is through a paid service called StreamYard, and that costs hundreds of dollars each year to subscribe to. I have upgraded some of my equipment over the years with lighting and a fast computer to be able to broadcast without delay. I have you know, a library of books to do the research to bring you this information. All of that is through your support. I mean, I'm a completely independent, self-employed person. I don't have any companies that I work for besides these large, you know, tech people like YouTube. So all your support really does help. So thank you so much for that, Julene, and everyone who is able to help out. Sunny D says, "You spin me right round, baby, right round." Oh, that's good. That would work for a blender song, right? I want your love, right? Oh, spin me right round, baby, right round, like a record, baby, round, round, right round. The only thing I can think of with that is the video. Sunny D, if you haven't yet, those of you, this will be a good laugh for the day. So the video is, I can't remember the name of the band, but Spin Me Right Round. If you search for that on YouTube, watch the video and then watch the shot-for-shot remake that Paul Rudd and I think it's Jimmy Fallon have made for that video. It's hilarious. Like, Paul Rudd is incredible in that video. It's so funny. And there's a few of them like that they have done together that are really, really good. I would also encourage you to look at the shot-for-shot recreation that Jimmy Fallon did with Jack Black in More Than Words by the band Extreme. That was super funny too. Yeah, but thank you for suggesting that, friend. Okay, so let's go. We're going to talk about Cancer 3 here just a little bit. And then towards the end, I'll just show you how some of this is going to unfold. And then we will give you an animal and an I-Ching. We'll probably be here maybe 30 more minutes. We'll see. We'll see how we're feeling. I like the one advantage of doing these earlier in the day is I have slightly more energy in the morning. 2 o'clock is usually my like dip, like my energetic dip where I'm like, I would like to lay down or take a walk or take a nap, like, and I've been starting my lives at that point, and starting it, right after my lunch is, I just have a burst of energy or something like that. So we'll see what works. All right, so Cancer 3, you can see this figure here that has his arms folded. He's refusing this extra cup of the divine. And this is what's going to be feeding energy into the eclipse itself, right? So this is called the Lord of Luxury or the Lord of Blended Pleasure. This is, we should ignore that name, the Lord of Luxury, because one of the things that comes up, especially in Austin Coppock's 36 Faces, is luxurious tastes with this decan. We have issues of scarcity versus surplus. Sometimes we will experience lack. Other times we'll have like more than we need. I have often seen people with prominent Cancer 3 placements be very wealthy, be very abundant. I've also seen people who have gone through extreme periods of hardship. Oftentimes there will be great philanthropists that can come through this decan who take their excess resources and utilize it to help others. I have Mercury here. I actually have Mercury at 22 Cancer retrograde. So this would be an interesting one. I've had in my life, my vision of abundance came through having fairly abundant grandparents, at least one on one side of the family, who were very luxurious in their tastes. They inherited a lot of wealth and then squandered it, and then we experienced the fallout from that and the ethical fallout from squandering wealth. I also was raised by a single parent for a number of years where we, tried to make Hamburger Helper, go for much longer because of massive amounts of debt from a custody battle. So I grew up with kind of both of those experiences, and I think that's really that's how Mars and Cancer 2 or 3, excuse me, just the decan Cancer 3 can play out. You'll sometimes get visions of both of those things. I've had periods of amazing abundance as an only child. There were times where I was very spoiled. I have step siblings, but there are other times where, a parent would leave your life. My parents were married and divorced multiple times. So there's two sides of that coin. So surplus versus scarcity, divine discontent. You can see that we talked about earlier, this figure is refusing an extra cup. So I often feel that this decan represents I've had enough, or the question, how much is enough? Have we had enough food? Do we have enough money? Like, this is what we should ask the oligarchs. Don't you have enough money? Right? Where is the point of diminishing returns? Just another personal aside is that there were times when, because of both the abundant times and the lean times that I've experienced, I used to eat really fast. And I thought that if I ate quicker, I would get a larger portion, if that makes sense. I don't know if any of you relate to this type of experience, like maybe more so with people with bigger families. Like, you have to eat real fast or you're not going to be able to get enough. And I've had to learn not to do that and not to overeat. Like, this is part of the energy of Cancer 3 is saying, I'm full now. I've had enough food. I've had enough pleasure. And if I eat any more, I'm going to feel bad. I'm going to feel sick. So this is some of the questions we could ask ourselves too here. Apathy, jadedness, and boredom. This is a big one. Oftentimes, people with Cancer 3 placements, or when we're experiencing Cancer 3 transits, we will just be like, I'm over this. I don't know what I want, but I don't want this. And I have learned with Mercury in this decan to trust that feeling as a precursor to a breakthrough, and to not just automatically fall victim to having to get out of it right away. Sometimes there's just this like calm before the breakthrough, calm before the epiphany. This sort of represents that on some level. Emotional saturation, Hesed and Bria. Hesed is the Jupiter Sephira in the Kabbalistic tree of life. And even though this is a lunar decan and lunar sign, there is a Jupiter coloration if we look at it through the lens of the Kabbalistic lens. So an overabundance of feelings, an overabundance of whatever. I often struggle to communicate if I'm feeling something too heavily. Like I know that I hopefully am a fairly clear communicator here on the channel. But when I was younger, and sometimes even into my adulthood, if I'm feeling really emotional, getting the words out is like swimming through 10 feet of water, right? The words have to, like I've screamed something at the bottom of a swimming pool and I'm waiting for it to come up to the air to be communicated. So think about that too. It's like we may be feeling a little bit emotional. We may be feeling a little bit like, man, it's hard to really get clear on what we want because it's colored by all these strong feelings. Also themes of luxurious taste, being overfilled, right? Sometimes people who have malefic planets like Mars, Saturn, or something, or even Venus in this decan, if it's, in a challenging place, you might desire things that are outside of your ability to secure them. I've gone through this in the past. There's been, I don't know if my tastes are luxurious. I would say that my tastes are, I have a attraction to things that last, things that are of high quality. And I don't know if that doesn't always equate to luxury. It equates to functionality. Unfortunately, sometimes things that last are expensive. Other times I have found that things that last I've found at a thrift store because they just aren't made as well as, like, an item will not be made as well as it used to be, right? So my partner and I call this the enshittification of everything, is because of corporate profiteering. Oftentimes there will be planned obsolescence when people make things. So like, for example, today's theme is the blender. Old Black & Decker, old Oster blenders used to be all like hard plastic, glass, metal, and the newer ones, the plastic is just flimsy. Like pieces of it are more likely to break because they've cheaped out on the parts that go into it. And this is true for all sorts of things because they're planning for it to break so that you're not gonna, so that you'll have to buy another one. Like, I don't know about you, but some of the best kitchen appliances I've ever seen are made in like the 40s and 50s or 60s, right? Where it lasted for 50, 60 years. My stepdad still has a blender that's like probably from 1970. Like, it works fine. Like, go to the thrift store, buy a blender. Should have done that. But yeah, the one that you get now might last you a couple years before breaking. And it's planned that way. That's what planned obsolescence is. This happens with vehicles. This happens with housing materials. Think about the wood that goes into our houses. It used to be old heartwood that was much stronger, but because old growth forests have been mostly cut down, now the new growth wood is not as strong. It hasn't had as many years or as many rings to get stronger. And that wood will deteriorate faster. Enshittification. And same thing happens when we deregulate everything too, because there are no oversight on corporate interests. There's nobody telling them that they have to make something healthy or that they have to adhere to certain standards of manufacturing, and they can do whatever they want. It's going to just, everything's going to become shittier because of that. So Mars at 22 Cancer, remember it's square and out of bounds. Where is the point of diminishing returns? This eclipse is going to talk about where's the point of diminishing returns. You know, like how much severing of quote unquote government inefficiency is just going to hurt people rather than do what they're intending it to do. You can make the argument that they're intending it to make the government not work so that we lose trust in it so that they can privatize everything. But you may be right on that. But questions you can ask yourself about Mars in Cancer. Where in your life are you feeling discontent? All right, where have you had enough? Do you need more, or have you had enough? Where is enough enough? What do you do with your surpluses? If you have more than you need, how can you help alleviate the suffering of others and share what you have so that you can uplift others in your community? Like, this is a really important thing to be able to do. Reciprocity is an important concept, not only in our own lives, but in, well, in nature, it is an important concept. And I was going to say not only in our own lives, but in nature too, but we are a part of nature. So we have to start practicing reciprocity like people in nature do, or animals and trees and organisms in nature do. We are part of those interconnected relationships. We are not separated from it as much as your exploitive religious tradition will try to tell you. So this is a point in the zodiac where we are questioning excess, scarcity. What do we do with the surplus? How do we become philanthropic with our excesses? Is this the lull that you're experiencing before a new breakthrough? That could be very important, right? This is, you may feel like you're bored, discontent, but this could be the time right before a major, major breakthrough. How can you reconnect with your passion? And then what comes next? Remember, the transition from Cancer 3 is the next decan after this is Leo 1. So we'll get fired up and we have to compete. We have to come out of our shell. We have to come out of our Achilles tent and say, here I am. That's what Leo often does. So here, I'm here. You know, if you've ever seen a Leo walk into the room, or a Leo rising, they command the room. They command attention, for better or for worse. So these are all questions to ask yourself about Mars. Tracy says, I have Mercury at 23 of Cancer, I believe, and MC at 28 can relate to both too. In the lack phase now, parents did a lot of leaving too. So interesting. Thank you. Yeah. Often all of these placements that we experience, there are different phases of the story, right? Oftentimes as children, we feel like these things are happening to us, and we wouldn't necessarily be wrong. Those events that come to us through the planets, through our fate, will create our habits, our beliefs, and our actions that we take as adults. We may have some more agency as we come into adulthood and we start to realize those patterns and those habits and start breaking those generational curses. Now, I will caveat that with there sometimes our adult lives, the planets will bring us the same situations that are somewhat out of our control, right? But I do think that through awareness comes some agency, comes some pronoia, some foresight that helps us to make better choices in the moment. I don't necessarily think we are completely beholden to all of the planetary energy. I think it's a combination of stoic acceptance of some parts of our fate. Hemermene is the type of fate that is not necessarily adjustable, but also we do have some agency as we start to learn more about it. Otherwise, what are we doing? We're just learning so that we can endure it? Maybe. But at least we know if there's a beginning and an ending to some of those phases, and that is equally as valuable. All right, so that's the host. That's Cancer 3. We've talked about, let's go back to our chart. Let's see if we can get this back here. Oops, let's remove that. There it is, and we're back. So now we get to, we've talked a little bit about the ingress of Neptune into Aries, And the first aspect that this eclipse makes is the sextile to Mars. And I'm talking about the first traditional aspect that the planet makes when it escapes from the bond of the sun. So there's a traditional technique called being under the bond, where when the moon is within 15 degrees of a conjunction or an opposition on either side, many of its quote unquote manifesting significations are sort of held in check. And once it escapes the bond and starts to become visible at the crescent, then we start to see things become manifested in our experience. The first aspect that the moon makes is very important because it shows us sort of what energy the moon is going to sort of absorb, right? Now, this one is very, very close. I was just thinking real quick. It is pretty close to Uranus, but the first aspect that it technically makes is going to be to Mars, okay? So we've got a sextile from the Taurus 3 moon to Mars in Cancer 3. So we may be thinking about dealing with our excesses and our surpluses and evaluating our efforts up to this point to do so. That's what the moon in Taurus 3 often does. Is it, first of all, it shows us humility in the face of nature. And the moon is going to be applying to Uranus, so we may have to think of innovative ways to break out of our old ruts, routines. Sometimes this is about repairing things. So we might be thinking about how do we repair things in our life to make a new start. I know in our household right now, the more things that we repair in our 140-year-old house, the more the other things that are broken stick out. You know, like I just went through a recent process of replacing some old blinds that had just gotten really gross and broken over time. And when I replaced like one of them, and then the other ones just looked even more broken and disgusting. Do you see what I'm saying? So it is a cascading type of thing. And that might be part of our experience with the first aspect that the moon makes sextiling Mars on April the 1st. That brings us to the first quarter moon. And this one's interesting here because we have the sun, let's see, square the moon. Okay, there's our first quarter moon. And this is on April the 4th. So here we have the sun at 15 degrees of Aries and the moon at 15 degrees of Cancer. This is funny because, you know, my sun is at 15 degrees, 33 minutes of Cancer, and that's where the moon is. So this, I'll have to tell you about how this one unfolds because this is going to be squaring my sun exactly. I think this first quarter moon, the sun has moved into the decan that is less about rejecting that which you are not and more about making a statement about who you are. So royal decrees, you could say, with this first quarter moon, but it's coming into contact and it's coming into a square with the moon in an equally powerful position. You have the sun in its exaltation in Aries, but the moon in its own domicile. And this decan is about safe spaces, walled gardens, communicating with a group, trying to create healthy growth within a hidden space. This is something that I enjoy doing. Yeah, and take care, Steven. Steven's taking off. Take care, buddy. Have a good weekend. In my classes, I try to create the conditions for everyone to be able to thrive and to have healthy growth. I try to do that within our talks here. Sometimes when these two planets are squaring off in these two decans, you may have a personal interest, okay, 15-degree Aries sun, and you may have to work within a group. So this is sort of the royal decree and declaration within the group, right? So your individual desires, but does that fit in a more sensitive space. Like, no one's going to accuse the Aries sun of being gentle necessarily. So, how do we reconcile our need for declaring who we are, sometimes even forcefully, with the need to be sensitive to the needs of others within our domestic sphere, our family, or whatever safe space that we're trying to create? So that's the first quarter of this lunation. Now, this is also, there's some really good news coming here. So a few days after that, on April the 7th, Mars is back in bounds. So you can see here about 26 degrees of Cancer. Mars is finally back in bounds. I mean, the only caveat with this is that Mars will be going back in bounds, but then it is going to be moving in opposition with Pluto and in a square with the Sun in Taurus once it moves into Taurus. But let's be grateful for what is improving, where Mars is sort of starting to operate more in the normal, quote unquote, socially acceptable way, rather than this maverick Mars that's just been creating conflicts willy-nilly and severing and cutting and destroying things without any sort of thought or, I don't know, reflection. So that to me is a big moment. I'm really curious to see how the energy shifts around April the 7th with Mars being back in bounds. And then finally, just one of the kind of the bigger picture things with this eclipse is that we will see the full moon of this cycle at 23 degrees of Libra. And that is kind of a special area of the zodiac because it's right on a fixed star called Spica, which is a very fortunate fixed star. That decan of Libra is really about bringing peace to a situation or of chaos through your own inter-centeredness. Think of this decan as maintenance mode to try to keep the peace. You've got a number of plates spinning, and you've got to keep spinning each one. You've got to increase that which is lacking and decrease that which is excessive. The sun is going to be in Aries I, which is going to be more related to trying to win over a hostile crowd, using humor, using charisma to win people over to your side. So this full moon could be more about how do you increase your, what qualities do you need to increase to be able to create a harmonious consensus or to even get the things that you want, right? It's hard to get what you want when you're an asshole. I've tried that. Doesn't work so well. It's like I've had my moments of, I'm a Leo ascendant. Sometimes the autocratic tendencies can bubble up, and you have to the pride part of it says, well, I said it, damn it, and I'm going to dig my heels in, and I'm not going to budge off of this. And that just never really works out very well. Oftentimes, to get what you want, you don't want to get blustery. You want to bring people on board. And this full moon is going to be, how do we bring people on board the journey rather than just bash them over the head with it, right? So you may have to make some adjustments to your methods at the full moon of this cycle. You may feel some really intense severing energy at the eclipse where you're like, I got to make this new start. I don't care what the collateral damage is. But at the full moon, you might have to start to consider the impact that your actions have had on not only yourself, but on other people. The other kind of elephant in the room with this full moon, and we'll talk about this more in a future broadcast, but it's squared pretty closely to Mars. So we've got a Mars square with this one. So there will be some tension at this full moon where we're going to be talking about surplus, scarcity. How do we increase that which is lacking and decrease that which is excessive? All right, friends, I think that's what we've got for the astrology here. We are going to go back to our hexagram. We've got this hexagram here, which is number 55. So hexagram number 55 translates to abundance, which is always nice, right? And it's moving towards the hexagram 50, which we call the cauldron. So 55 Also translates to zenith, fullness, splendor, plenty, generosity, acting decisive, living in the present, and making the most of the good times. A lot of the language in this I-Ching hexagram talk about this is a zenith moment, right? Where it's a peak of energy. We don't necessarily expect everything to be like this forever, but we have to make the most of it while we can. Okay. And the same thing is true in Aries season. We might not have this motivation forever, but sometimes we have to act in the moment, or we might not get that moment back. So there is a few changing lines. There's 3 changing lines. So the first changing line says, when one meets his lord and counterpart, they can be together 10 days, and there is no blame. Going forward begins esteem. So this is talking about aligning yourself with someone who has similar values and goals to yourself. Maybe achieving something with a partner that you couldn't achieve alone, which is interesting because this is a very individualized decan that we're seeing the eclipse in. But it's encouraging us to think about how we can initiate, which is still Aries, but do so in a way that we do so collectively. So I think that that's the first part of this. The second changing line says, abundance is screened so completely that one can see the pole stars at noon. If one sets forth, he meets with enmity and distrust. But if one has sincerity that shoots forth like an arrow, good fortune comes. So Jack Balkin, in his translation of the I-Ching, The Laws of Change, says, when one's abundance is screened, it means that one's gifts and abilities are hindered or not properly recognized. Because of intense opposition, one's light is hidden. Oh, that sounds kind of like an eclipse, doesn't it? Where the moon is hiding the light of the sun. Although you have great potential and much to offer, you are unable to make progress now. Obstacles obstruct your advance. Circumstances that you did not cause stand in your way. This to me feels like the square from Mars a little bit, like where there's maybe some mistrust or there's a lack of resources or you have to make decisions. This tells you to maintain faith in your goals and that eventually people will recognize your value. The right people will come to support you and your influence will spread. So I think that this is a call to patience through the process, which is always a good remedy or medicine for Aries heavy placements. And then finally, the top line says, abundance in his house. He screens off his family. He peers through the door, lonely and abandoned. For 3 years, he sees no one, misfortune. So this is sort of like talking about the end of the good times. This is a warning from the I-Ching about going too far. When we go too far with our desires, when we go too far with our desire for power, for success, for independence, we end up cutting ourselves off from sources of support. And I think that this is a real reflection on like my own country's desire to sever themselves from people who have supported them in the past. I don't agree with it. I don't support it. And I hope that there are actions taking to reverse that, because we are a global community. And if you go too far towards independence, whether it's in your personal life or socially, that can lead to all sorts of hardships for everyone. Everyone loses in that circumstance. So personally, in your own life, how can you make a new start, feel your personal sovereignty, but not go so far that you cut yourself off from others? To use that yang energy, but don't do it to destroy every source of support that is around you or every other opinion around you. We need feedback from each other. We need to be able to check in as to if what we're doing is healthy, especially with Neptune moving into Aries. Is we may have delusions of what we can do by ourselves, and it could be very seductive to attempt to do so. But you may find by the end of it that no person is an island. And I think you can save yourself a lot of suffering by recognizing that early on rather than late in the game. So this is changing to the cauldron, which also translates to cultural renewal, in with the new, establishing things, formation of a new order, devotion, creation of new rituals, polishing your talents, seeking spiritual values and being of service of others. So think about this as a cooking pot, right? We've got all the elements that we're trying to add into this, and we need to let things simmer a little bit. We got to put the right ingredients in there. We need to have the right temperature. We need to let it cook for the right amount of time. I think this is just a beginning. And when we put all the right elements into it, eventually that's going to help us to have this delicious meal that will sustain us, whatever that means for you. Could literally be a meal. It could be a project. It could be a community that you're building. All of those things we're thinking about metaphorically. Now, the animal I got for you guys is interesting. I'm going to show you a picture of this animal in a way that you've probably not seen it very often. I got the conch. And here is a picture of a living conch snail, which normally with conchs, we just see the beautiful pink shell that you see as like this trumpet that people play into or whatever. But this is what the animal looks like. Isn't this crazy? This little snail with his little googly eyes everywhere. I just thought it was adorable. So the conch, I'm going to read a little bit to you from a book called Animal Frequency by Melissa Alvarez, this is my kind of oracle book that I use for this. I'll just kind of randomly flip to one. It's sort of like a deck, but I would just use this as my reference. It says, the conch is a large sea snail that lives in the oceans. Conch shells are spiral inside and come to a point at both ends. People use them as trumpets to alert others of the coming of danger or as a call to gather together. Conch shell often enables it to blend in with its environment, which represents security and defense. As such, conch is a symbol of family, security, and success. It has the talents of awakening, balance, the call of the wild, camouflage, defense, emotionality, empathy, enlightenment, honesty, inspiration, music, spirituality, and wisdom. Some of the challenges associated with the conch could be being blunt, boastfulness, overly emotional. Remember we talked about Mars in Cancer 3, the excessive emotion. Prideful, tactless, okay? Conch means to speak your truth with power, conviction, and belief. You are a leader, and others look up to you for your wisdom and spiritual enlightenment. Sometimes people may not want to listen because it's easier to avoid the truth than to face it, but your words are delivered in such a way that they will understand and benefit from them. Conch means you're not afraid to toot your own horn if it means helping another person. While you prefer living in your shell, you'll come out to inspire and teach others. Sounds a lot like Achilles to me, doesn't it? Coming out of the Cancerian shell on some level. Your strength is in your balance, wisdom, and ability to see within the spiritual realm and to share the knowledge you've gained. You're an inspiration to others and helping them to develop their own abilities and walk their own spiritual path. Conch means that you may have musical talent as a singer or in playing an instrument. The spirals within conch shell are an indication that you are able to pull deep within yourself, connect with inner consciousness, and experience enlightenment. The best part of this is you're able to share your experiences with others in ways that will allow them to do the same thing for themselves. Conch can assist you if your life feels turbulent, as if wave after wave of problems are crashing over you. Conch can help calm the waters and show you the light shining through from above. It can help you speak your truth, find your own voice, sounds very Aries, and remain calm during tumultuous time. Conch can guide you so that you know when it's appropriate to speak of your accomplishments and when you should let others talk about what they've done. Sometimes listening to someone discuss their accomplishments gives them a feeling of respect and admiration that will empower them to do more with their lives. This doesn't mean that you have to sit and listen to a braggart for hours on end. There is a difference between the two, and conch helps you to see it. Conch symbolizes the awakening of the heart to love. It can assist you in the affairs of the heart, relationships, and with the family. I love that. So, knowing when to toot your own horn a little bit, learning how to be calm within turbulent waters. We all could use a little bit of that. Look at these eyes. They could see multiple directions too. They move pretty slowly along the ocean floor. So probably a guide to slow down and maybe to see things from multiple perspectives. I think this is a really great animal guide for this particular eclipse. See things from multiple perspectives. Try not to get caught up in your own soup, and slow down a little bit and be proud of your accomplishments, but don't take it too far. Balance is the key. Yes, it is cute. Rachel says it is cute, isn't it? There has to be some. I believe that there is there has to be some kind of cartoon that has a conch like animal in it. I recognize this a little bit, that there is some kind of animal that reflects this energy, or cartoon character, but it's escaping me at the moment. But anyway, that is the animal that we have for the eclipse. So, my friends, I think that's what I've got for you today. So do me a huge favor. If you want to follow me on social media, you can find me at Spencer Michaud. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on all of those places where you find people. Go follow me there. You can also find me at spencermichaud.com if you'd like to reach out for a reading. Do me a huge favor, friends. Please like this video. Subscribe to the channel. Reach out if you need a reading over at spencermichaud.com. I will see all of you in 2 weeks for the next live broadcast. I'm going to be taking the next week off. Next Friday, there will be no broadcast, but I will be back after that. Going to take a little bit of time to recharge around the eclipse, and we'll see what comes of it. I think hopefully there'll be some positive, exciting manifestations for all of you, and for myself and my family, and for you as well. And just hang in there. Eclipse season can be a little bit unsettling. Everything's kind of shaken up at the moment, but some things will start to become clear as we move forward through this process. And just one day at a time, friends. All right, that's what I've got. We'll see you the next time. Thank you so much for being here with me today. And be kind to yourself through the changes. And most of all, be kind to other people. You never know what people are going through and the suffering that they're experiencing. So try to just have some grace as you move through your eclipse period. All right, friends. Peace.